I'm over here more often.
Ready?
I live near between Chester Hill and
Can you hear me over
Stockport.
these?
Just upriver.
I'm on.
You know where Stockport is, I know. You taught up in
All right, can everybody hear me now? Nope. Nope.
Oh, the auction, yeah. The produce auction.
We're getting there. This is only the fourth time.
So you taught up at Mount Vernon.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I'll do this. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for being here today. I've got some notes because there's several little things that I wanted to say today. So thanks for coming. A little cold outside. I appreciate you being here. So welcome to Campus Martius Museum, and welcome to those who are watching on our live stream right now. Cardi is busily making sure this works. So I just set up here. This is only our fourth time trying it, so we get better each time. But last few times, we've had at least a dozen people watching live on the live stream while we've all been in here. So it's great that we're able to offer that service. So I'm Erin Augenstein. I'm the Executive Director of the Northwest Territory Museum Society. Our organization acts as the site manager for Campus Martius Museum for the Ohio River Museum. And if you haven't driven by lately, please do take a look at the new construction. We also serve as executive producer of One Vote the Musical, and you'll be seeing more about that as the year progresses. Our Discovering History Speaker Series is sponsored by Washington County Public Library. It occurs typically the first Friday of the month at noon. January, the first Friday was January 2nd. Not only could I not find a speaker, I didn't think most of you would probably want to be here. But for the most part, it happens on the first Friday of the month at noon here, again, live stream through our YouTube channel. We started adding more speakers throughout the month. Sometimes they're on other days and times. So sometimes they're on a Tuesday evening or a different time, but it depends on the availability sometimes of the speaker. I'll get contacted by authors or speakers or agents who want to bring somebody to town. And if we can make it happen and it's not on a regular day, I don't want to skip having them here just because it's not our regular time. So thank you to the Washington County Public Library for continuing to support this great speaker series and for assisting us in getting the video up and going. And thank you to Cardi for figuring it all out for us, and Roadie Rentals helping us get us all installed. So our next speaker after today will be on Friday, February, is that 5th or 6th, I believe. It's Ohio Department of Natural Resources Historical Programs Administrator and Interpretive Professional, Philip Hutchison, who will explore ODNR's role in preserving, protecting, and interpreting Ohio's rich cultural heritage. This presentation will include case studies of several ODNR historical projects, as well as an exploration of how nature itself is a cultural and historical asset. I'm sure I don't need to tell most of you in this room, because I've seen you at these places, but 2026 is an exciting year for those of us working in history, as it's the semi-quincentennial celebration of our nation's independence. Did I cut out? You hear me? Okay, cool. Our state commission, America 250 Ohio, has been working diligently for a few years now, creating programming and offering grant support to other programming from partner organizations throughout the state. Not only is today's session a partner event, but we also received a grant a few years ago to support our 360-degree virtual tour of the Putnam House, which is available on our website, and there's a QR code out in front of the house. So if the house is not accessible for whatever reason, maybe there's maintenance, maybe someone has accessibility issues and is unable to go upstairs, you can do this 360 tour. It's like a fancy real estate tour of the house. We're hoping eventually in the next few years to have one of those for the Snyder as well. But again, baby steps for us since we live in 1788 most of the time. So we thank you to the commission for sponsoring this and for that. And again, I do want to always say thank you to our legislators who were looking forward several years ago to this year and planning for this year well before a lot of other people were putting money into it, adding funds to things. There will be some more announcements of additional funds that are coming out. Soon you'll hear from some local organizations who received additional funds, and it was the legislators who started planning that a long time ago that most of this is really happening. So without further ado, so today's speaker has quickly become a valued colleague to me, whether he wanted to be or not, right? Yeah. So I appreciate very much for this first Discovering History of the Year. Please welcome Tom O'Grady.
Thank you. Thanks, Aaron. Just a little disclaimer at the beginning here. I haven't done this presentation ever before, and it's not a super academic thing, but it's sort of a hobby. I've been learning more and more about Southeast Ohio history, and it's amazing how many incidences I find about Southeast Ohio history being American history, and in many cases, world history. And it's not something we teach in our schools, and I think it's something we should. So one of the most obvious, and if I make mistakes on this thing, feel free to correct me. I don't want to continue lying to the public for very long on this thing. But one of the first things that's obvious in the world perspective of Southeast Ohio is just the names of places here. We have Guernsey County not far from here, named after the Isle of Guernsey in the English Channel that was settled by a Norman Briton culture group. Gallia County and Gallipolis, the city of the Gauls, a French settlement. The Welsh came over and ran the iron furnaces over in western Southeast Ohio, and there's so much of that. The place names, the rivers are named after Native American groups, and then there's small towns that were settled by free blacks that came into this area, or those who came up, the freedom seekers seeking, freedom from bondage, and there's so much of that down here, and we don't connect to it. We take it for granted. It's just around us all the time. So Southeast Ohio is a melting pot, or more appropriately, so maybe a mosaic of different culture groups: the English, the French, the Swiss. Think of Monroe County, the little Switzerland of Ohio. Greeks in some of the small towns around here that came in and opened up shops and restaurants. Hungarians and other Eastern Europeans that came in to work the mines, Russians, Scandinavians. And most of them came to farm. And they came to build, the Irish, they came to build canals and railroads, and these people that just came to work the factories and the iron furnaces. So it's an amazing place, Southeast Ohio. But Southeast Ohio, it's, these earthworks. There's as many earthworks in Southeast Ohio as anywhere on the planet. And, a couple of them got designated as World Heritage Sites in the last few years. Guess what? They're all World Heritage Sites. They just haven't been designated by UNICEF yet. Marietta, of course, has got plenty of its own Native American earthworks. And another interesting thing, Marietta was the first settlement in Ohio, where Ohio began here, and right out of the gate, they preserved this. Preservation of earthworks, we haven't done that good of a job in American history, but Marietta got started right out of the gate preserving this stuff, and so it's pretty impressive. The plains in Athens County, a lot of that's been developed, but someday I believe they'll be, taking down the shopping centers and the houses and restoring the earthworks and identifying the plains as a World Heritage Site, because they didn't recognize what it was when they moved in there. And of course, Southeast Ohio is flanked by Newark and its earthworks, and Chillicothe and its earthworks. And these are the biggest geometrical earthworks on the planet. And we're just, all the time we've been studying these things, we still know so little about them. We can describe them, we can interpret what we know about them, but they didn't come with any operating manuals. And so, and many of them appear to be built in alignment with the complex cycles of the sun and the moon and the stars. And we're figuring that out just now after 200 years of studying it. And who knows what we'll know in years to come. But this is impressive stuff in Appalachian, Ohio. And a lot of times in Appalachian, Ohio, kids grow up and they don't have a great feeling about their background, because they hear about poverty and they hear about things of that sort. And yet the rich history that's here is something that every child should be proud of. But if we don't teach local history more than we do, then they won't have any awareness of that. As back as early as 1749, a Frenchman, Céloron de Blainville, came down from Canada, from Montreal, burying lead plates. This is world history. And what were they doing with these? And they buried them. He came down with 216 French Canadians and 55 Native Americans, and they started planting these lead plates, and they were claiming this land. They planted them at the Muskingum, the mouth of the Muskingum, the Kanawha, the Scioto. About 6 of them that I know about. And among other things on these plates, they were claiming that they were planted to reestablish tranquility in some Indian villages and to serve as a monument of the renewal of the possession we have taken of the said river Ohio and of those which empty into it, and of all the lands on both sides as far as the sources of those named rivers. Quite a claim. This is world history happening right here. George Washington, everybody in America's heard of him, and he came down the Ohio River in 1770, searching these lands for himself and also suitable lands to award soldiers who fought in the Revolutionary War. And there's a little bit of information about that around, but not a lot. In 1774, this is a big story here. Chief Logan, a Mingo chief, Seneca originally, his family was massacred along the Ohio River, and so he retaliated against that. And folks back east were looking at the Ohio country for expansion and settlement purposes, and massacres are not good for real estate development. And so John Murray here, Scottish Earl, governor of Virginia, came here. He put together 2 wings of an army, and he led something like 12 to 1,500 soldiers down the Ohio River to the mouth of the Hockhocking and marched 1,500 soldiers up that river, right through the places that became Stewart and Athens and Nelsonville and Logan. And that's not something people know very much about there. And another wing came down the Kanawha River, and they ended up having a battle there, the Battle of Point Pleasant, in October of that year, with Chief Cornstalk and some of the famous leaders in Ohio American history, Blue Jacket, Chief Tarhee of the Wyandottes, Nanhalema, a warrior chief, the sister of Chief Cornstalk. And nobody won that battle that day, so they retreated back up to their communities up around what we call Circleville today. And Dunmore's army finally got up there, and they had a treaty with the Shawnee, and that treaty was the Shawnee expected pretty harsh treatment after that battle, but they didn't get that. What they got was Lord Dunmore trying to convince them that if some conflict starts in the next couple of years between the colonists and Britain, that they should side with the British. And so that was part of the treaty there. Chief Logan, whose family had been massacred, he chose not to attend that treaty, and he gave a speech under this famous elm tree there known as Logan's Lament. And that speech, when it got back east, Jefferson printed that speech up in the only book he ever wrote, Notes on the State of Virginia. And he compared Logan's speech to the oratory of Cicero, Demosthenes, and was one of the first people at the time we in America were referring to Native Americans as savages. He elevated them to the level of some of the greatest orators in the Western world. And it is said that at one time in American history, nearly every school child committed that speech to memory. Now it's not part of our history every day. But, you know, Logan's speech is not a very long one. It's carved in granite there at the site of the Logan Elm where he gave that famous speech. And that Logan Elm became a destination for people for many years until it succumbed to the Dutch elm disease back by the 1960s. And then when Dunmore's army, he was the Scottish Earl, but the rest of them were colonists from Virginia. And when they got back to the confluence of the Hockhocking River and the Ohio, these fellas had been living on out under the stars and sleeping under the stars and eating off the land, and they'd engaged with Native Americans in both in battle and in treaties, and they're kind of feeling their oats, and they knew what was happening back east when they left. They knew about the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, and they knew about feelings about, you know, the crown and taxation and all this. And so they passed some resolutions here called the Fort Gower Resolves. And these resolutions They agreed to defend the king and the crown against any, I'm going to paraphrase here, against any insult or injury, et cetera, as long as they chose to rule over a brave and free people. But they said they would defend the colonies against the king. Now that got back east, and it was printed in the Virginia Gazette by December of 1774. Thomas Jefferson would pick that up and read it, and that would have been part of his thinking over the next 18 months before he penned his more well-known declaration. But there are many scholars who will claim that the Fort Gower Resolves was America's first Declaration of Independence, right here in Southeast Ohio, before we were a state even. The surveys, the township and range surveys, the rectangular survey system in America started in Appalachian, Ohio, over on the banks of the Ohio River. And they went from indiscriminate surveys or the meets and bounds surveys, which are challenging because the planet doesn't stand still. And so rocks and trees and river banks and things that were boundaries of properties once upon a time change with time. But the rectangular survey is built up based off of the North Star, and it started in Ohio along the banks of the Ohio River. It did not happen between the Scioto and the Miami, the Virginia Military District there, so that's called the indiscriminate survey. But the rest of Ohio is based on that, and it started here in the 7 ranges over in eastern Ohio along the river, and then it continued across the United States. Started right here in southeast Ohio. Manasseh Cutler, this fellow from Massachusetts, had this amazing vision of the Ohio country, and he came up with the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which was going to create this new society out here in Indian Territory, but in this wilderness that was going to be based on education, morality, and the prohibition of slavery. This is significant. Many nations in the history of the world and around the world eventually got to the point in their existence where they finally abolished slavery. But you can look pretty hard, and it's hard to find any place that started right out of the gate saying, we're not going to have it. There's not going to be slavery here. And he helped get the West settled here, the Northwest Ordinance, that very significant document that also called for habeas corpus, and trial by jury and religious freedom. But the prohibition of slavery was so significant here. The first purchase out of the Ohio Territory was the Ohio Company purchase with Manasseh Cutler and his crew, and they purchased nearly 1 million acres, and they came down, which includes modern day Washington County, Athens County, Gallia, Meigs, and Lawrence counties, and they came down here and settled. Of course, the first settlement being, coming down the river on that flatboat, the Adventure Galleon, and stopping at the confluence of the Great Muskingum River, the biggest drainage system in the state of Ohio. And on April 7th, 1788, began a new society. And Campus Martius, these early places to help get it started. Rufus Putnam, I'd be remiss to be here and not mention this fella. And he played such a key role in getting the area surveyed and leading the expedition here, and creating not only the Ohio Company, but Marietta itself. David McCullough, great Pulitzer Prize winning American historian, came here and wrote his last book about this territory. He came here and he basically told us this place is important. And we need to take that to heart and remind ourselves and then remind others about the importance of this part of the world. The Mound Cemetery here in Marietta, it has the largest number of Revolutionary War soldiers buried, as I understand it, in any cemetery in the United States. And again, the earthworks here that were preserved right out of the gate, it's a pretty impressive thing. Zane's Trace, the first federally funded transportation route after the establishment of the country, connecting Wheeling, Virginia at the time to Limestone, Kentucky, which is Maysville today, and that's where the Buffalo Trace met the Ohio River coming up out of the south there. And This facilitated westward expansion and spurred the growth of towns like Zanesville, Lancaster, and Chillicothe, establishing key ferry crossings, and served as a vital pioneer entry and artery for migration long before it was surpassed by canals and railroads. Ohio's state capital, it's of course the first territorial capital, was right here in Marietta, but then the state capital, and they held a constitutional convention in Chillicothe in 1802 and struggled. And then with Ephraim Cutler, the son of Manasseh Cutler, his story coming to here is phenomenal, coming from Connecticut and Massachusetts and hacking farms and a society out of the wilderness. But when they had their constitutional convention, this guy, Manasseh gets a lot of the credit for Ohio being an anti-slavery state, but he wrote it down. He had a vision. Ephraim's the one who came over here and slugged it out in the wilderness, and he's the one who fought it out in the Constitutional Convention. And when it came right down to creating Ohio's Constitution, the prohibition of slavery only passed by a single vote, and he's credited as being the most outspoken advocate for the prohibition of slavery. And this is important stuff in American history. Everybody should know about Manasseh and Ephraim Cutler. And you get out of Marietta, and they have Cutler Hall over at Ohio University. They don't know these stories too well. They don't. They need to be teaching it. When they got here, one of the first things they started doing was building seafaring ships, cutting down these primeval forests and building ships that sailed around the world. When the Indian Wars ended after the Greenville Treaty in 1795, Commodore Whipple, Joseph Barker, General Tupper, Jonathan Vole, and others were building these ships, a lot of them. And the Muskingum, built in 1801, was towed from Marietta to Cincinnati, took on a load of pork, lard, and oiled cake, and from Cincinnati it was towed to New Orleans, fitted with sails, and departed for Liverpool, England. The Muskingum also took on a return cargo and came back to Boston, where it was sold. The Marietta, built in 1802, picked up a partial load in Cincinnati, topped off in New Orleans, and went to Boston, tried to sell the ship in Boston, failed, made 2 voyages to Cuba and 1 to Savannah before heading to Uruguay, 38 degrees south latitude, with a cargo of salt, where it met the Muskingum, which hadn't been and finished its career yet. So it met the Muskingum in Uruguay. And then the brig St. Clair was built in 1801. It sailed to Buenos Aires and then to Havana. And that was captained by Commodore Abraham Whipple. This is local history. This is world history. The John Farnham, this is built a little later, built in 1847 in Little Hocking. It was towed to Portsmouth, where it was loaded with corn grown in the Scioto Valley. It was floated to New Orleans, and then it sailed to Cork, Ireland, as a relief ship for sufferers from the Irish potato famine. Amazing stuff. And then the Mary Bell Roberts, built 1860, one of the last seafaring ships built on the Ohio. It left Little Hocking in Washington County, sailed to New Orleans, where it was outfitted. Shipping charts list her in Havana, Cuba, in 1865. After rounding Cape Horn at the tip of South America, the Mary Bell Roberts sailed through the Golden Gate in San Francisco Harbor, and it was greeted there by former Ohioans who had gone west seeking their fortunes. Sailed around the tip of South America, and they went everywhere from here. John Chapman, he's from Leominster, Massachusetts, and he entered the Ohio country and American legend when he turned off the Ohio River with his canoes and canoed up the Duck Creek here in Washington County around 1800. Some member of his family settled in northern Washington County around Dexter City, where this monument's located, and some are buried there. They say if they find his father's grave up there, I think it's Nathaniel Chapman, it would be known as a National Heritage Site, a National Treasure Site. Ohio University, it started out as the American Western University, It was established in 1804, the first university in the Northwest Territories, and it graduated its first black student as early as 1828, John Newton Templeton, and that was an early step towards racial inclusion in higher education, long before the national civil rights movements. 1825, the Marquis de Lafayette made his world tour, and he came up the Ohio River, stopped in Gallipolis and Marietta 50 years after the American Revolution. A hero of two worlds. He strengthened the French and American diplomacy, diplomatic ties, and his trips served as an endorsement of the American experiment in democracy. Right here. John Quincy Adams, he's one of my heroes. He came to Ohio in 1843 as a congressman. This is 15 years after he was president. He's one of the few people who went back into Congress. And he fought the gag rule, and he was the most outspoken abolitionist in Congress for many years. But he was also a big advocate of astronomy. And he came to Ohio in 1843 and came down the Ohio Canal from Cleveland to Hebron, got on a stagecoach, went into Columbus, and then over to Springfield and down to Cincinnati to lay the cornerstone of one of the first observatories in North America. And that observatory today still has the oldest continuously operating telescope in North America. And on his way back, instead of heading back east the same way he came up the Ohio River, and when he got to Marietta, he met up with Ephraim Cutler, Joseph Barker, and a fellow named Emerson, and they went into towns to investigate the Native American earthworks here in town. John Quincy Adams, American history. And he didn't know it at the time, but that was part of his astronomical expedition, because they didn't realize the earthworks were laid out in alignment with the stars that early. And he was also significant in creating the Smithsonian Institution. He was chairman of the Smithson Fund, and he made sure nobody spent a dime from that fund. He made sure that the Smithsonian Institution got created, and the very first book that came out, very first publication, was the Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, which included the Native American earthworks here in Marietta. The Underground Railroad in abolition, southeast Ohio, bordering along slave states, played such a key role. You'll see a couple of places here, Albany and Hebbardsville in Athens County. I don't know if that many trails headed into there, but all these towns, especially the river towns like Marietta and Gallipolis and Ripley and places like that, played such a key role and established these routes and safe houses and stations, helping move these freedom seekers to a better world. And I'm going to come back to this Albany in a bit. A guy named Samuel Finley Vinton from Gallia County. He was noted for his service on the Public Lands Committee in Congress. He served in Congress for quite a few years, and he had as great of an influence as anybody, according to Thomas Ewing, who I'll get to in a moment. More influence in the House of Representatives, and much more than any other man in it. He helped establish the United States Department of the Interior. Important to this very day. And Vinton County and the village of Vinton in Gallia County are named for him. Thomas Ewing, he grew up in Amesville. His father and Ephraim Cutler were the first two settlers of the Ames region over in what became Athens County. It was still Washington County at the time they got there, and carved some farms out of that. Thomas Ewing, he earned money to go to college by going down into the salt fields in the Kanawha Valley, and he was known as the old salt boiler. He was one of the first two graduates of Ohio University. He moved to Lancaster, became an attorney, became a United States Senator. He became the United States Secretary of the Treasury under William Henry Harrison, the first ever United States Secretary of the Interior under Zachary Taylor, and he was ultimately nominated as Secretary of War under Andrew Johnson, but that was never agreed to because that man was impeached. And then Thomas Ewing had three sons, all of whom served as generals in the United States Civil War. And he also raised a neighbor's orphan son. From the age of 9 years, he raised up Tecumseh Sherman. I think his wife insisted he he'd take on a Christian name because she didn't want to raise a boy with a heathen name in her home. She was Catholic. Anyway, he raised him up and secured him a position, an appointment to West Point. And then Major William Tecumseh Sherman served as the first president of the Louisiana State Cemetery of Learning and Military Academy in Baton Rouge. And he resigned that at the outbreak of the Civil War. That school today is known as LSU. He was the first quarterback that Southeast Ohio sent down to LSU. Many know about his service in the Civil War, and he was eventually made general of the Army. Thomas Ewing raised him, and from Ames. They started in Waterford from Marietta. This is all Washington County history. Another fella, Phil Sheridan, Irish immigrant family, raised up around Somerset and Perry County. We know his contributions in the American Civil War. He also enforced black voting rights after the war and limited former Confederate opposition and controlled the control of voting. Less known are his efforts associated with the protection of Yellowstone National Park and his personal crusade for conservation out there. He promoted military control of the area and prevented the destruction of the natural formations and wildlife, and he organized opposition to the development of a railroad into the park and the sale of land to developers, and he lobbied Congress for protection of that. And of course, he did not have as admirable of a relationship with Native Americans, and a lot of us know that. The iron industry, the Southeast Ohio and Jackson and Gallia County and northern Kentucky. This was the Hanging Rock Iron region, the biggest iron fields at the time in America. Iron ore smelted at this furnace, the Jefferson furnace, was used to build the first ironclad vessels in American history. And iron ore was smelted there that was used to build the Monitor, the first ironclad warship commissioned by the U.S. Navy, and its famous battle with the CSS Virginia at Hampton Roads, the Battle of the Ironclads. It was often referred to. It revolutionized naval warfare, and it was often known as the cheese box on a raft when I was a kid. This ore was quarried and smelted in Southeast Ohio. And at the Hecla furnace in Lawrence County was the ore that they used to build the Swamp Angel. That was a large gun used in the siege of Charleston, and it represented a massive Union siege of our artillery siege with engineering famously firing from a swamp. And let's see, it's become a revered historical artifact in Trenton, New Jersey. But these things, where would the Civil War have been without the iron quarried and smelted in Southeast Ohio? It also was used to build the railroads and expand the industry during the Civil War and right afterwards. Morgan's Raid, a large raid in Ohio led by General John Hunt Morgan, and they came across southern Ohio. They had a battle in Meigs County, the largest and most significant Civil War battle fought on Ohio soil, and it led to the northernmost battle up in Columbiana County, where Morgan was captured. And this Union victory here at the Battle of Buffington Island was significant psychologically important after the North's tremendous losses at Gettysburg and Vicksburg encounters earlier in the same month. So this was significant. Although they didn't lose those earlier battles, the losses were great. The losses were not great here at the Battle of Buffington Island for the North. Speaking of raids, another significant raid in the American Civil War was Andrews Raiders, which was a bunch of young Ohio boys heading into the South, and their intention was to steal a train and take that train from Marietta, Georgia to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and burn all the bridges in between and sever the transportation systems in the South. The scheme was a complete failure. 7 of these guys were hanged on a street corner in Fulton County, Georgia. Others escaped or were swapped in prisoner exchanges, but it was a complete failure, yet it led to the first ever Congressional Medals of Honor given in American history. And these fellows here all have a connection with Southeast Ohio. They were either born here or enlisted in the Army here. And the fellow in the center here, Samuel Llewellyn, he's the only one who ultimately didn't end up with a Congressional Medal of Honor. He appears to have turned it down. He went on into the Ohio legislature, so he knew about all these things, knew about paperwork, and he apparently did not think he earned it. They all failed in their endeavor here, but they were the first ever. There was one fella who was part of this, but he was a civilian who joined up from Columbiana County, and he didn't get it either because it's a military award. But speaking of, ironically, one of these fellas just got his Congressional Medal of Honor last year, 2024. It was presented on July 3rd. He was from northeastern Ohio, and it was presented by President Biden up in northeastern Ohio to Philip Shadrach. I was looking around, and there were a lot of congressional medals. Here's a fellow named Milton Holland. He was born in slavery in Texas. His father was a senator, and he came here. His father sent him and his brothers to Albany, Ohio. I mentioned Albany before because it had these centers of learning for black people, and it had a place where he could be trained for different skills and occupations. He was here during the war. He tried to enlist at the beginning of the war. They wouldn't take him, but after the emancipation, then he was able to enlist, and he also raised a regiment in Athens County at the fairgrounds. And because he raised the regiment, he was, I believe, a sergeant. And at the Battle of New Market Heights in Virginia, all of the white leaders in that organization were either killed or wounded and taken out of action. So he rose to the cause, and they carried the day, and they won the encounter at New Market Heights. And he received the Congressional Medal of Honor as well. Born in slavery in Texas. It's American history here. Here's the school, one of the schools in Albany, Ohio. This is the Albany Enterprise Institute. Opened its doors to students in 1863, making one of the first black established, black owned, and black run institutions of higher learning in America for black citizens. Here's a story about a fellow from Chillicothe in the Civil War, Richard Enderlin. And at the Battle of Gettysburg, he heard a fella wounded out on the field. He risked his life to go out there and drag this fella. His name was George Nixon. And he pulled him to safety. Ultimately, George Nixon died. George Nixon, turns out he was the great-grandfather of future President Richard Milhous Nixon. George Nixon was from Vinton County. Enderlin was from Ross County. And Richard Nixon's grandfather is buried in Vinton County. And his father, Richard Nixon's father, was born in Vinton County, but he's the one that moved out to California to start a business, and that's where the president was born. But there's a lot of roots here. There's also connections to Winston Churchill in Vinton County. So many Civil War, or so many Medal of Honor recipients in Southeast Ohio. I did a cursory research of this and found over 70 of them in Southeast Ohio counties. But most of the data was incomplete for most counties, and for some of the counties, I couldn't find any information. This is a marker just in front of the courthouse in McConnellsville, just up the river here. And there's 5 Congressional Medal of Honor winners from the Civil War there. We could find out more about that. John Clem, the drummer boy of Shiloh, the youngest fella to ever enlist in the Civil War, came out of Licking County, and he achieved some heroic efforts at Chickamauga at age 12, and he finally retired at the end of his career as a major general, Southeast Ohio here. Liza Brown Davidson was born into slavery. She was on a farm or a plantation in Virginia, and when it was liberated, she joined up with George Armstrong Custer's family, and she became an aide and housekeeper and cook to the Custer family. She developed a complex, mutually dependent relationship with Custer and his wife, Libby. She ran the Custer household, even traveling with her own kitchen wagon, and she's credited with saving soldiers from drowning on the expedition after the Civil War when Custer went out west to Wyoming. Libby Custer, Custer's wife, maintained a relationship with Eliza Jackson in Athens, Ohio, and wrote about her extensively in her book called Tenting on the Plains. Charlotte Scott, born into bondage in Virginia, which is West Virginia today. She came to Ohio and Marietta after the emancipation. She's working over here, and after Lincoln was assassinated, she thought that that fellow should have a monument built to him, and donated her the first $5 toward that out of her hard-earned earnings. And the black community raised $18,000 to build the very first memorial featuring Abraham Lincoln, or to Abraham Lincoln. And this is the one, and it's in Washington, D.C., and it was erected on the 11th anniversary of his assassination. John Wesley Powell, raised for several years in Jackson, Ohio, where he developed a keen interest in natural history. After losing an arm in the Civil War, he went on to become the second director of the United States Geological Survey, first director of the Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology, and he championed science-based policies, an early advocate for conservation of land and water in the West, influencing the creation of the Bureau of Reclamation. He was the first person to lead a scientific expedition down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon in 1869. This fellow from McConnellsville, just upstream here, at the age of 17, went down the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon on John Wesley Powell's second expedition in 1871. He served as the official artist, assistant topographer, and he developed a map of the first ever map of the Grand Canyon. And then later he went on the famous Harriman expedition with all these other scientists and key people. In 1899, he was the official artist and illustrator documenting landscapes, wildlife, indigenous cultures, and through his sketches, paintings, writings, etc. This fellow here, born in Rutland, Ohio, Brewster Higgsley, he wrote a tune called My Western Home. That was its original title. We know it better as Home on the Range. This is a nationally well-known thing. It was used as the theme song for TV westerns back in the 1950s, and became the official state song of Kansas, written by a guy from Meigs County, Ohio. Here you go, Januarius Aloysius McGahon, son of Irish immigrants, born in Perry County. And he was too young for the Civil War, but after the Civil War, he was recommended by Philip Sheridan to go over to Europe and become a war correspondent. And he did that. He was over there working as an American journalist and war correspondent for the New York Herald and the London Daily News. And his fearless and graphic journalism depicting the atrocities of the Turkish army, that the Turkish army was visiting upon undefended elderly, women, and children of Bulgarian towns, catalyzed a shift in European diplomacy and directly contributed to the liberation of Bulgaria from Turkish rule. They were killing every single person in these towns. He would get there and there would be dogs dragging body parts up the street and gnawing on them in the shade. And he wrote these articles and described this. He is known in Bulgaria as the liberator of Bulgaria. Every June, an entourage comes from Chicago, the Bulgarian ambassador, and they meet at his gravesite. He died just a couple of years later. He died at age 37 or something like that in Bulgaria. They brought him back. He's buried in New Lexington today. And so they visit his grave in June, a Saturday in June every year, and have services at the grave and then spend a morning in the library with programs and activities. He is the classic example of the pen being mightier than the sword. He brought an end to the massacres in Bulgaria. And he's not well known in Perry County, but in Bulgaria they name streets and squares and parks and schools after him. The Hanging Rock Iron region, which I mentioned a little earlier, northern Kentucky, and was the largest and most significant iron producing region in America at the time. So important in supplying charcoal, iron for the Civil Wars, and it was much of the labor there was undertaken by immigrants from Wales and Germany. The Belgian coke ovens. This was innovative science. You know, think of these iron furnaces. This was high level metallurgy happening in a primeval forest of southeast Ohio. And each one of these forests consumed something like 15 square miles of forest in their career. And once they set one of these iron furnaces to blast, it ran for something like 13 months, 24 hours a day, people dumping limestone and iron ore and charcoal in the top of these things. Whole villages grew up around these iron furnaces, and the Belgian coke ovens were to try and use coal instead of timber that was made from the charcoal that was made from the timber. Here we have Robinson's Cave, just on the edge of New Straitsville up in Perry County. This is where the United Mine Workers Association started, in this cave. This is significant. And while the organization was finally formed in Columbus in 1890, it started with meetings, secret meetings, in this cave in New Straitsville, the birthplace of the Union movement in the Hocking Valley coal field. Chris Evans, 19th century labor leader, was involved with those people up there and helped negotiate mergers with the minor unions operating in the coal fields. Richard L. Davis was of national significance in the Hocking coal fields, stemming from his role as an influential black labor organizer, advocating tirelessly for interracial unity and in the United Mine Workers Society. And he ultimately was a member of the National Board of United Mine Workers, voted from the late 1890s. Brick manufacturing. So many towns in southeast Ohio, including Marietta, were significant in the brick plants. Here in Marietta, you got Sterling Pavers and the Sizzler Pavers and Acme Pavers. These not only paved the streets of southeast Ohio communities, they have paved the streets of communities throughout Ohio and other states. These famous Star Brick paved a lot of, and they won the, let's say here, they got the 1904 World's, they won first prize at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. These paved streets and sidewalks in Columbus, Niagara Falls, New York, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Ann Arbor and Battle Creek, Michigan, and other places. The Trimble Brick Plant, they made bricks for a lot of places too. You don't have to go far to find them, but they also contributed to the bricks paving the Indianapolis 500 Speedway, known as the Brickyard. The pottery industry in Muskingum and Perry counties was major national significance. The area around Zanesville and Roseville, pottery capital of the world. It's where the American art pottery movement started in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The industry was a vital component to the local economy, employing large numbers of people and attracting skilled craftspeople from around the world. The Hocking Valley coal field, not only were they known for getting the unions started, but they also, those unions and those people working and fighting for fairness, started a fire in one of the mines up there, and that is the longest burning mine fire in the world. It's been burning for over 140 years. The Berry Hotel in Athens, built by a black entrepreneur, was the first hotel in the nation to provide Gideon Bibles, closet hangers, sewing kits, and fruit baskets in every room, set new standards for guest comfort and service starting in the late 1800s. This fella here, another Meigs County wonder, George Willis Ritchie from Tupper's Plains. He was the son of immigrants, Irish immigrants, and he designed and built the largest telescope in the world twice. He built the 60-inch telescope and then the 100-inch telescope that were put up on Mount Wilson in California. He designed and built a telescope that Edwin Hubble used in his PhD project. And with this 100-inch telescope, Edwin Hubble used that telescope in 1929 when he discovered that the universe was expanding. It was bigger than anybody ever imagined the universe was, and at the same time, it was getting bigger every moment. That was a paradigm shift, changing the way people looked at who they are and where they are in the cosmos. And this discovery was laying the groundwork for the Big Bang Theory, which we all have heard about today. They even named TV shows after him. That all came from this mirror right here and this telescope with Edwin Hubble. Everybody's heard of Edwin Hubble. Nobody's ever heard of the guy who designed and built his hammer, so to speak. And then George Willis Ritchie designed a whole new type of telescope, and he built it for the United States Naval Observatory. It was set up in 1932. He died in 1945, and it was put up in Washington, but it never lived up to its hopes and dreams and expectations of Ritchie because of the fog coming in off the Potomac Basin and the lights coming into the city. But in 1955, they moved that telescope out to Flagstaff, Arizona, and it knocked their socks off. And since that time, almost every major telescope on all the mountaintops around the world are based on the design of the guy from Tupper's Plains in Meigs County, and including the Hubble Space Telescope. Now, Edwin Hubble didn't have anything to do with the Hubble Space Telescope. The fact that he's famous is because George Willis Ritchie from Tupper's Plains gave him the right tool to do his work. Hubble got his name on his telescope. Ritchie's optics are on that telescope. And still, who's ever heard of George Willis Ritchie? But his optics are also on the Spitzer Space Telescope and other objects in outer space. Although he's not known almost at all in Meigs County or anywhere in southeast Ohio, the people who use his instruments are so appreciative, they have named a crater on the moon after him. So there are craters on the moon named for Copernicus and Galileo and Aristarchus and Tycho Brahe and Humboldt and Einstein and George Ritchie from Tupper's Plains, born 25 minutes from here. And they also named a crater on Mars after George Willis Ritchie. But there's no marker in Tupper's Plains or anywhere in Meigs County that lets anybody know that. So teaching this local history is really important. And speaking of the Hubble Space Telescope, if you remember when it was launched back around 1990, it got up there and it was out of focus. Nobody checked it. So they had to send launch the Hubble camera mission. And this guy, Story Musgrave, who was educated at Marietta College, is the guy who went up there and did the spacewalks and replaced that camera with a corrective lens. So thanks to Southeast Ohio, the Hubble Space Telescopes offered quite a bit to world history. This little mining shop in Colton in Jackson County, there was a fellow named John Patterson running this, and he was using this little cash register, and he realized, boy, this little object has a bigger future, and he left Colton, went to Dayton, and created National Cash Register, one of the biggest corporations on the planet Earth. It was amazing. Came out of Colton, Ohio, a town that you can drive through and blink and you missed it. Ambrose Bierce, born not far from here, also in Meigs County, played a key role in he was in the Civil War, and his realistic portrayals of the Civil War discarded a lot of the romantic notions of combat. He was widely read investigative journalist. He used his pen to expose corporate corruption, and he wrote an enormously satirical and popular book called The Devil's Dictionary. He played a key role in helping to fight against corporate corruption back in the early 1900s. He's known for having, last anybody heard from him, he was headed down into Mexico during the Mexican Revolution. He said, apparently his parting words were, maybe the next time you'll hear from me is I'll be stood up against a wall at a firing squad in Mexico. And nobody ever did hear from him again. He disappeared in Mexico. Here's a guy, Adam Clayton Powell Sr., while working as a coal miner in Renville, a small racially integrated mining town in Perry County, experienced a religious conversion. He left Ohio and eventually became the pastor who developed the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, and it was the largest Protestant congregation in the country. His son, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., is better known back to some people, and he went on to become a well-known United States congressman representing the Harlem district for over a quarter century, Southeast Ohio. Jim Thorpe, gold medalist, and he played football for the Portsmouth Shoe Steels. His final professional athletic role in Ohio was as player coach for that semi-pro team. Jim Thorpe's fame and leadership was instrumental in the NFL's formation, and he served as the first president. Coming out of Portsmouth, Ohio. William Rainey Harper. This is an interesting fellow. He and his brother were two of the greatest linguists in America at the time. He was a child prodigy who spoke Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. He was the foremost scholar and leading authority on Semitic languages, from Aramaic to Classical Arabic and Babylonian. Did anybody know they spoke Babylonian? And he was a Yale professor. He helped found the University of Chicago with John D. Rockefeller. He was a key figure in securing the funding for the Yerkes Observatory and the largest telescope on the planet at the time. And he led a revolution in the transformation of colleges and universities. He went to college at Muskingum College in, up there in New Concord. His house is still standing on the main street. He grew up in a log cabin. This guy from Zanesville, architect, he designed the United States Supreme Court building and state capitol buildings in Minnesota, Arkansas, and West Virginia, and a dozen other iconic buildings across America. Cass Gilbert. Look at that building. It's a lot in the news these days. Howard Chandler Christie, born upstream here along the Muskingum Valley, the American illustrator and artist. And he's mostly known for the Christie girls that he established, but he also is known for the painting of the scene at the signing of the Constitution, which hangs in the United States Capitol building, and it was depicted in American history books for 3/4 of a century. We've all seen that picture when we were in school. And he also did the largest painting that's hanging in the Ohio State House, the signing of the Greenville Treaty, which incorporates some of the key people in the opening of the West. And he's also known for his powerful patriotic posters during World War I, promoting liberty loans, bonds, and enlistment. Zane Grey grew up in Zanesville, a town founded by his grandfather. And while living in Columbus, he made rural house calls on behalf of his father, extracting teeth for people. His dad was a dentist. That's where he got his start. Then eventually he played ball up there, played some semi-professional ball, and then he went on to the University of Pennsylvania and got himself a legitimate degree in dentistry. But he got his start doing house calls for his dad. Imagine that. And he went on to write so many books, over 90 novels, many of which were made into films, and many of the famous American movie stars got their start in his movies. Charles Gates does, Marietta. He studied at Marietta College, served in France in World War I, was decorated with the Distinguished Service Medal and the Croix de Guerre in France, and for the recognition of his service, he received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1925 and was elected Vice President of the United States the same year. Local history. The USS Shenandoah, one of the greatest rigid airships built in America, and it was the first to use non-flammable helium instead of oxygen, a major safety improvement, and it was the first to fly across America and back, and it did it in 19 days. But on one of its trips, it broke up in a line storm over Noble County, just north of here, and fell to the earth, taking 14 crew members to their death, while another 29 of them miraculously survived falling from the sky. This amazing monument, the March Westward Monument in Marietta, is an iconic work done by Gutzon Borglum, same artist who carved Mount Rushmore. Clark Gable, from a small town not far from here, Cadiz, and he was often referred to as the King of Hollywood, appeared in more than 60 motion pictures, won an Academy Award for Best Actor, was nominated for that a couple other times, will be long remembered for his role as the complex anti-hero or compassionate and charismatic scoundrel Butler in Gone with the Wind. Branch Rickey, baseball player, manager, sports executive, and team owner from Scioto County. He broke the long-standing color barrier, which had been an unwritten rule since the 1880s when he signed Jackie Robinson into the Major League Baseball in 1947. Clarence Bevo Francis from Southeast Ohio, one of the most prolific scorers in college basketball history. During his career at Rio Grande College, scored over 100 points in a game on 2 occasions, and still holds the NCAA record for points scored in a game in games from 1954 to 2012. In 1953, he averaged 48.3 points in a game, which stands as the NCAA record. He was a member of the barnstorming team that played against the Harlem Globetrotters and was then drafted by the Philadelphia Warriors in the NBA draft in 1956. He opted to return home to support his family as a truck driver and steel mill worker. 2 of the most famous cowboys in American history came from Appalachia, Ohio. Roy Rogers, of course, started life as Leonard Sly, grew up in Scioto County. Country singer, he recorded between 70 and 80 solo tracks and hundreds more with his group and with his wife, Dale Evans. They recorded over 400 songs with him. He starred in approximately 90 feature films, often alongside his famous horse Trigger and his wife Dale. He became known as the King of the Cowboys. He was the only country singer to be inducted twice into the Country Music Hall of Fame. He starred in over 100 episodes of the Roy Rogers TV show, which raised an entire generation of young people. 400, at the height of his fame, approximately 400 different Roy Rogers promotional items were on sale at the same time. 1955 Sears catalog featured 13 pages of Roy Rogers branded merchandise. Children carried Roy Rogers lunch pails to school. And of course, William Boyd became a famous movie star during World War I in silent films, but he started playing a character called Hopalong Cassidy in 1935. When the producers decided to quit that, he purchased the rights to it and created the Hopalong Cassidy TV series. And same thing with promotional items, and everyone in America knew Hopalong Cassidy and Roy Rogers. Emma Gatewood, Grandma Gatewood from Gallia County, mother of 11, grandmother of 23. At age 67, with tennis shoes and a burlap sack for her supplies, was the first woman to walk the entire 2,163 miles of the Appalachian Trail from Maine to Georgia. And then she did it a couple more times. And she also walked other trails like the Pacific Crest Trail and some others. What an inspiration to people. John Glenn, born in Cambridge, Ohio, grew up in New Concord, went to Muskingum College, served in World War II, and then he joined NASA and became the first American to orbit the planet Earth. In 1998, he was the oldest human to go into space at age 77, and he has been celebrated nationally and globally as a hero, a scandal-free model for citizens of the world. Beyond his space flights and service in the Senate, Glenn embodied the spirit of American exploration, inspired scientific pursuit, and served as a model for dedicated public service, making him a globally recognized figure. In 1964, Lyndon Baines Johnson gave a speech in Athens, Ohio, which included his first public introduction of his message about building a society where no child will go unfed and no youngster will go unschooled. LBJ came to highlight the poverty in Appalachia and connect the fight against poverty with building a great society of opportunity, making Southeast Ohio a symbolic launch site for this broader anti-poverty effort. Athens, Ohio, played a crucial role where LBJ expanded this vision and rallied support for the anti-poverty crusade. Nancy Wilson, born in Chillicothe, became a world-renowned jazz singer, achieved national and global significance as a vocal stylist, crossing jazz, pop, R&B, and winning Grammys and hosting her own TV show. But she was also a civil rights activist who marched with Eartha Kitt, Sammy Davis Jr., Sidney Poitier, and Dr. Martin Luther King at Selma in 1965. Acclaimed soprano Kathleen Battle from Portsmouth, Ohio, sang Italian opera at major opera houses worldwide, establishing herself globally with her voice in the 1980s and 1990s. Maya Lin, architect, designer, and sculptor born in Athens to Chinese immigrants, attended Yale, and in 1981 received national recognition when she won a national design competition for the planned Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial is one of the most popular monuments in America and worldwide, and is one of the most visited. It is the most visited on the National Mall, drawing millions each year. In 1989, she went on to design the Civil Rights Memorial and the Montgomery, Alabama, and received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Sarah Jessica Parker, born in Nelsonville, Ohio. Her accolades include 6 Golden Globe Awards and 2 Primetime Emmy Awards. Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2022. And then Joe Burrow from Athens County, the second quarterback sent down to LSU from Southeast Ohio, put these people on the map. And after William Tecumseh Sherman got it started as its first president, Burrow is now the starting quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals. While accepting the Heisman Trophy, Joe Burrow's first instinct was to reach back with a helping hand to fellow citizens in Southeast Ohio in need. He is transformational, and he's a transformative leader in professional sports, a prominent advocate for Appalachian communities, and a philanthropist focused on food insecurity and mental health for youth. Southeast Ohio is where Ohio began, but its people have been making America history and world history since the outset. So anyway, that's all I have to say about all that. Oh, thank you. Ignore that typo. I just saw it. Anyway, anybody have any questions? Anybody have any answers? Yes.
I've never heard of that, but I know
Which one? The shoe steals? Uh-huh.
Never heard of that, but I am familiar with Portsmouth Spartans.
Right. I don't know if he played with them, the Spartans football stadium and all that.
Yeah. And I know that the Portsmouth Spartans traveled north up what's now 23 and became the Detroit Lions.
Yeah. That's another piece of American history right there. Hey, anybody who can add to this, I think we need to tell people in Southeast Ohio how important this place is and how many important people have come from here and what they have done. So thank you for that. Yes. Yeah, he played for the Shoe Steals. I remember reading an article somewhere he was playing against the Lawrence County Tanks. So that steel industry down there must have been making tanks out of that steel, and so that's what they named their school icon, or their mascot. Somebody else? Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned about schools for training black people. Was it Albany?
Yes.
Okay. Are any of those buildings still standing?
No, the last one that I knew of was the Albany Manual Labor Academy. It was a feed store as late as the late 1990s, and then it got torn down. It got replaced with a pole building that sells feed. So, no, there were 3, I believe: the Atwood Institute, the Annual Manual Labor Academy, and the Albany Enterprise Academy. At the Southeast Ohio History Center in Athens, we have the lintel that was over the door of the Albany Enterprise Institute and the cornerstone of the building. Somebody at least thought to save those, but none of the rest of it remained. And I would say largely the people who grew up in Albany don't know that amazing, rich history that they have. So, again, anybody else? Yes.
Well, I know there are a couple of people that came and spoke, like Maya Angelou and Martin Luther King. I know Terry Mulholland, is a professional baseball player in Kansas City. My mother, since passed, but she had an article, I wish I could find it, and it talks about all the people that came from this area. And she said anytime they got high on their horse about where I live in southeastern Ohio, I'd whip it out and I'd tell them who was from here, and it's astounding.
It is.
Astounding.
It is. And you know, it's sad. I didn't grow up in Southeast Ohio, and so the impressions you get of Appalachia from up there is washing machines and appliances in people's yards or over the hills down here. And that sticks with people, but that's not it. You know, we should be having people think about Appalachian Spring, you know, the symphony, because there's a lot of that down here. And it's a matter of preserving what's left of all that. Even if it's ruins, even if it's ghost towns, these are great assets. The natural and cultural heritage of Southeast Ohio are the greatest assets that we really have. A lot of the things we're building today, they're making money for people and they're creating jobs for people in the short term. But what are we creating for the long term? What heritage worth preserving are we creating? We are fortunate enough to have inherited a lot that's worth fighting for and worth preserving, but what are we saving and what are we building, even more importantly, that will be worth fighting for? Yes.
I think too, with the onslaught of data centers and taking land near us that, because there's not very many people or there's a lot of land, and creating data centers and having injection wells and things like that are coming in, and they're not really helping us, but it's making money for corporations.
And because those high-paying jobs, people can come down here and they see the land down here is cheap compared to what they're experiencing in big cities. And so next thing you know, the land prices for people who've lived here for generations, they'll have a tough time being able to stay on their own properties. I've heard stories up in Hocking County where, Hocking County's been discovered by Columbus and all the tourism growth up there. And so people can't afford, and they've had to tear down buildings so they don't have to pay taxes on it, and they've had to do this and sell off because their taxes have gone up because of nothing they've done. And it hasn't really benefited them, it's benefited somebody. So it's a struggle. And this is America, and that's how Southeast Ohio got created, with those same principles. But, there's more people now, and we really need to think about how these things affect our neighbors and affect each other and affect, people down the road. A lot of children grow up in these towns in Southeast Ohio, and the first thing they want to do is leave. What makes these towns vibrant and exciting to stay in is the character of these towns, what's left of them, and the stories that are associated with them. And so I know this about an old building. If it's an old building, it's just an old building. But if you find out something about that old building, well, it's more important. And the more things you find out about the building, the more important they become. So I think we should find out more, because our buildings, our identity as individuals and as communities and as a society are framed by partly our genetics, our identity, and the people we grow up around, but it's also the environments we grow up in and the buildings that we grow up around us. And when you go away, when you come back and you find out somebody tore that building down, which was a part of your life for so many years, and when it's gone, part of you went with it. And we need to start recognizing that they're just not just old buildings. And the inherent energy in these buildings, the energy that it took to mine the clay and to cut the stone and to harvest the timber and to transport these things and to build these things, that's not recoverable. And when you bring in more energy to demolish it and throw it away and replace it with something that doesn't have that story and that character with it, it's a tremendous loss. And on the verge of what we're starting to talk about the Anthropocene epoch of Earth's history, the human influenced epoch. It's important what we do with energy. And, one of the worst things we can do is tear down old buildings. And an opportunity for every community, and especially our institutions, is to be the leaders in how to repurpose old buildings and make them the green buildings of the future, because they were all built to last 1,000 years. The immigrants who came here and built these buildings built them to last for a long time. And we barely let them get to be 100 years old. And next thing you know, the track hose there. So anyway, my dad told me a long time ago, Tommy, what you need is a pulpit. So I give a lot of sermons about this stuff, but I think historic preservation is an opportunity, and it should not be a battle. Every time you want to save a piece of American history, why is it a battle? Why isn't it a celebration? Oh, we're all going to get together and save this piece of history that helped build America. And that's where we should be with that. And those are the things that make our towns so distinctive and significant. And anyway, I can go on for a long time about that. Anybody else? Yes.
In almost every building downtown, in downtown Marietta and all the little towns, each have stories that whether they go back 50 years or 100 years, or let's see, we have this cabin right here, we go back farther than that. But every anecdotally, and I know some people in this room put in regular articles in the Marietta Times, and you know, thank you for those folks in the Historical Society who helps fund those kind of things, because every week there's a great Marietta story in the paper.
You know, we're all just temporary stewards of these amazing buildings, and you know, if we have control or authority over it, we should be researching the history of it and putting that history right there front and center somewhere in the building, so that when transfers to the next hands, they know what they're getting. You know, I'm a member of another group called Friends of Ohio Barns. It's a statewide organization trying to preserve our barn heritage. These old barns were built out of the primeval timbers of Ohio, and the foundations were cut from Ohio's bedrock, and they were built to last forever. And we just tear them down. You could never afford to put one of these up again. And, you know, this is so important that we do this. And I'll just a little advertisement. This organization's having its 25th annual Ohio Barn Tour and Ohio Conference in April of 2026. And they've selected Washington County for the site of that. So in April, we'll be here, and we'll have an event at the Campus Martius here on Thursday evening, and then there will be a day-long barn tour on Friday, and then a conference here in town talking about the importance of the role that that was the most important building in the Ohio landscape for a century. Ohio fed the world, and these were the buildings that protected the harvest, and we let them go. We don't see the value in them, and either we let them rot and decay, or they're now being harvested. You know, we've harvested the iron and the salt and the coal and the timber and shipped it all out of Ohio. Now we're harvesting our heritage, and these old barns are being taken apart and shipped to the Carolinas and New England and the Rocky Mountains, so people can build second vacation homes for these things. And what should go with them, if they're not going to stay here, they should at least take the provenance with them. So when some of the barns are being cut up for flooring, well, the people who get that floor in there, if they don't bring some of that provenance, they should have photographs of the barn, the map where it came from, the deed, a copy of the deed, so that when the house changes hands, the people get it and know the history of that floor. That served as a barn in the Ohio's Midwest, and you know, it helped feed the world. These are important things. You know, that ship that was built here in Marietta, and it was sailed down to Portsmouth and loaded with grain and taken to Ireland to feed people in the famine. What amazing stories. This is heroic stuff. It was just what they were doing that day. But think of it. Think of the role it played ultimately in history. And so today is tomorrow's history. And there are no bystanders, so make sure you're doing the right thing. Yeah.
Tom, are you aware that there are any major efforts for the high piers at Dunbar, the old railroad piers? They're incredible, but the last time I saw them, they're being graffitied.
I don't know of any initiative, but again, it's making these places. It's a double-edged sword. If you make them an attraction and a destination, then that is the kind of thing that brings all the issues of tourism, like the Moonville Tunnel. You guys all heard of the Moonville Tunnel? Well, I discovered it back in the 80s when the train used to go through it. Twice I stood in that tunnel when the train went by. And boy, does it get the adrenaline flowing in your body. And the whole mountain shakes when it goes through. Now it's a destination, and people come down from Columbus, and then they wander around, and they've vandalized graveyards in the area, and the Boonville tunnel's all graffiti just like that. So I don't know. I think if we're going to draw attention to these things, we have to do it in a thoughtful way. You know, the worst thing to an old building is not to use it, so you got to use it to keep it functioning. And it may be the same with these things, but how to do it and do it right, and how to protect the people in the neighborhood from, you know, too many people, too many visitors. It's a double-edged sword. I don't know the answers to these things, but those are an American treasure, those Dunbar trestles. I'm sure everybody here has seen them, but I want to show them to everybody, but then I don't want anybody to see them. You know, don't know where to go with that exactly. Yes.
If you want more information about the Underground Railroad in Southeast Ohio, come to Farmers Castle Museum.
Yes.
Where we have the gallery founded by Robert Burke, local historian. Open Monday, Wednesday, Saturdays 1 to 4, or by appointment.
And they just got an award at the Ohio State House last month from the Ohio Hill Country Heritage Area at the annual Appalachian Heritage Awards luncheon. So keep up the good work. It's so important. You know, it's people and it's the people of Southeast Ohio and the volunteers. So many of them are volunteers that are saving the heritage of this region. You know, the state isn't doing it that much. They're doing some, but historic preservation should be opportunities for economic improvement in this area. And there's always money for demolition. Have you ever noticed that? There's always money for demolition. Where's that same amount of money just for mothballing and keeping something standing until people are ready to repurpose it to be a functional piece of our community again? And so we got to keep talking about this stuff and educating folks, because otherwise we lose it. Anybody else? Yes.
One you missed. W. Lee O'Daniel, born in Malta, Ohio, is governor of Texas and senator from Texas.
Yes, good. Another guy born in Malta, just an aside, is a fellow named Otto Strahl. Born in Malta, but he went to the Virginia Military Institute, and then when the Civil War broke out, he joined the South, the Confederate Army. He became a Confederate general, and he was one of 6 Confederate generals which were killed in a short number of hours in a late afternoon in November of 1864. At the end of the war, the Battle of Franklin, Tennessee, 6 Confederate generals were killed there that day, including this fellow from Malta. There are a number of governors of Ohio that come from Southeast Ohio, but a lot of people from Southeast Ohio went on to become governors in other states. That was one of them. There's a lot. This I would hope is just, you know, a basic framework to build onto. There should be, every one of these stories here is worth an hour presentation, hour discussion, because I just raced through them so I could get done in time, and they all have so much more to be said about them, every one of these. So if you can add to this story, thank you for that, and these other things. The Spartans, yes. It's American history. It's important. People should know it. People in Portsmouth should be so proud of that. And I know a lot of them are, but a lot of them don't know it. And so we can do more. Yes. What was the name of it? The John Farnham. I think he was the owner. There were so many shipyards here in Marietta and Little Hocking, building ships that sailed the world. It's amazing. And we should know more about that. There's a long list, but it's hard to find. Maybe they have the information here at Campus Martius or at the Washington County Historical Center. What I was able to put down was stuff I could find online, but it makes me want to know more about it. All righty, thanks for coming out. Sorry you couldn't find something better to do with your time this morning.